Welcome to Mindset Tools Mastery. I'm David Phelan. In this presentation, Being Grounded in Your Faith, we're going to focus on principles and practices to increase your sense of certainty of who you are and who you're called to become, and to allow this certainty to enable your business to thrive. So first, I'd like to start with some definitions. So when I talk about being grounded, what do I mean by that? So the images that come to mind for me is to imagine a table. Maybe you've had the experience of being at a restaurant, sitting at a table, and the legs of the table aren't balanced, and so the table rocks back and forth. When we're talking about being stabilized, it would be like that table having all four legs solidly on the ground. I remember that a presentation given by Dan Marley, who at one point was the coach for the Grand Canyon University men's basketball team. And during that presentation, he was talking about the plays that he was developing for the players and things that he paid attention to, the things that he got worked up about and the things that he didn't get worked up about. And he said, he was never bothered by players not making shots, because some shots you make and some shots you don't make. But what would get to him were things like, did they run the plays the way that they were supposed to? Were they in the positions that they were supposed to be in? And I remember in particular, he said that one of the things that he was working on with the players at that time was to make sure that as many shots as they could were taken, starting from having both feet planted firmly on the ground. Because he said anytime that both feet weren't on the ground before the shot, the player was off balance and they were much more likely to miss the shot. So when I say grounded, that's what I mean, a sense that both feet are on the floor and that we're stable. So that's grounded. And then what do I mean by your faith? So faith in this context is a strong belief in God that's based on a spiritual awareness rather than empirical evidence. As I'm working with my clients, sometimes people can get stuck because they're trying to figure out whether God exists or not. And they're trying to prove to themselves the existence of God. And what I find that they're trying to do is to use empirical evidence, that they're trying to use the methods that, like the scientific method, that we would apply to facts that can be verified, and trying to apply that methodology to God. But God isn't in the material world in the same way. God is spirit. And so the tools that we use for trying to validate some things in the material world, the same tools just don't apply to God. So our belief in God, our faith, comes from spiritual awareness or spiritual experience rather than empirical evidence. Now, I approach things from a Christian perspective. My background is that I'm Catholic, but the perspective that I'm talking about and the faith that I'm talking about really is in resonance with the tradition of all the great religions of the world. And so whatever religious tradition you might be from, or maybe you don't have any particular tradition at all, there is still a faith in God that is common, and that's what we're talking about. Now, what's the advantage of being grounded in your faith? When you think about what you can have as a source of your balance, if the source of your balance is anything other than God, it's going to be unstable. What do I mean by that? So a lot of people find their balance in their relationship with their spouse or their partner, or in their family, or in their church. But with each of these, the challenge is that all of those things are going to be unstable at times, right? If my balance is my wife, and my wife is having a bad day, my stability is going to be more shaky. right? I've been a part of a number of different churches and have gone through some really rocky things within those churches. And so if my stability is in the people at church or the community or the church itself, if that's where my stability is, even that can be rocky at times. But if the source of balance is God alone, then because God doesn't change, that there's always going to be a sense of stability there. And then when we are stable in our faith, then our problem solving can be stable and our growth can be stable. So the advantage of being grounded in your faith is that kind of stability. And so the question that I'd like you to ask yourself is, what would it be like for you if you really had the experience that God was on your side, helping you to solve the problems and to accomplish the results of your business? What would that be like for you? And I just want you to take a moment and think about that. My guess is if you were able to connect with that, that's a very encouraging thought. And that's where I'd like to help you to get with this presentation. So how do you ground yourself in faith? Now, some of you watching this presentation may already have this dialed in. And if you do, that's great. I'm going to share some ideas. And as I'm going through these ideas, maybe ask yourself, is there anything that you can add to what you're doing? If there's any distinctions that you can make about what you're doing that would be helpful for you. And if this is new for you, I'd like you to consider whether or not what I'm saying is making sense to you. And if it doesn't, that's okay. It's okay to let these ideas go if they don't work for you. So how do you ground yourself in faith? One of the things that I suggest to my clients is always to start from the idea that God is love, right? If we start with that, then that's going to be a solid foundation. Because one of the challenges is that sometimes we're off balance even before we start to figure out how to ground ourselves in our faith, right? We can be given ideas about God that are not helpful. They're ideas that we didn't choose ourselves, but have been handed on to us. And oftentimes they're handed on to us by people who are very well-intentioned, but we can end up with some very unfortunate ideas about God, like that God is judgmental. He's judging whether we're doing, whether what we're doing is right or wrong, that God is punitive, that God is patriarchal, that God is angry, or that God is transactional. I'll give you this if you give me that. Or sometimes we can just have the idea that God is aloof and is separate from us and is uncaring. But I want you to think about what difference it would make if you had the sense that God is supportive, that God is encouraging, that God is gentle with us, and that God is infinitely in love with the preciousness that he finds in you. If we can have that experience, then it's going to be much more easy to be stabilized in our faith and to allow our faith to impact our business. So again, when we're going to work on being grounded, we want to start with the awareness that God is love, because that idea can cut through a lot of the mental noise that we can experience. You know, there's a lot of conflict in the world. There's a lot of conflict even about God. There are, you know, differences between religions, and there's a lot of disagreement and conflict. In fact, you know, wars have been fought over the differences in religions. Even within religions, there's conflicts that happen. You know, there can be questions about what the Bible or what other sacred texts actually say or what they mean. And it can lead us to questions like, is God judging me? Is God condemning me? Those kinds of things. So if we start with the idea that God is love, then we can take all of those other conflicting ideas and we can square it with that one idea. Does it square with the idea that God is love? If it does, we can hold on to it. And if it doesn't, it's okay to let it go. So we start with the idea that God is love. And then the second thing I recommend to people is to recognize that God has made you. And he's made you both to be and to do. So I want to talk about a little about both of those. First, about being. When God made you, the reason that God made you is so that God could love you. Why? Because that's God's nature. Love requires a lover and a beloved. You were created so that God could pour out God's love for you and on your behalf. And part of what that means that God has made us is that your truest nature is what God has made you to be. You've been made in God's image. Now, the world tries to tell us who we are, and oftentimes we define ourselves by the world's standards. We might think of who we are as being what we do or what we have or how we act. We might think that we are our personality or our emotional states. We might think who we are, our identity is our successes or our failures. But what I'm going to suggest to you is that all of those things are temporary and all of those things are subject to change. And so what that means is that your truest identity is in God, and that's not subject to change. That means that nothing has the power to name who you are except the love of God. Now, so we think about who we are. We think about that we've been created in God's image. We have been created so that God can love us. And then the next part of being grounded is simply to allow God to do that, to allow God to love you. And when you allow yourself to be loved by God, the conclusion that we come to is that what we are ultimately looking for in life, we already have. We already have it because God has given it to us freely. God's love for us is a gift to us, and we already have that. And so if we recognize that we already have everything that we need and everything that our heart truly desires, then we might ask ourselves, well, why would we want to do anything else? And that comes to our doing. So God has created us both to be and to do. When we take time to allow ourselves to be rooted in faith, we recognize that with God's love for us, there's nothing that we're going to be able to accomplish that's going to make God love us more, nor is there anything that we can screw up that God is going to make that's going to make God love us less. So our security is in the love that God has for us, and our efforts, our doing, is irrelevant in terms of God's love. Now, that may seem like that would be disabling, but what it actually does is creates a sense of freedom that I know that I can do from a place of security. I'm already secure in God's love, and there is a peace that is not dependent on the outcome of my efforts. And so when I go to do something, whether it's in my business, whether it's in relationships, whether it's in any area of my life, then I don't have to be too attached to the outcome because again, I know that I'm secure regardless of what the outcome is. So experiencing the love of God for us at this level allows us to experience freedom, and the freedom allows us to learn and to grow and to create, again, because it provides a peace that's not dependent on the outcome of our efforts. And that peace allows our effort to be even more fruitful. So it reminds me of the saying, how tall will a tree grow? It'll grow as tall as it's able, and it doesn't worry about the growing. So if you think about your doing, your efforts, who you're becoming like that tree, you're going to become what you're capable of becoming. And again, we don't have to worry about the outcome of our efforts. In the 2nd century, Irenaeus wrote, "The glory of God is man fully alive." So when we're working in our business and we're working to solve the problems and to accomplish the results of our business, you're growing and becoming the person that you're capable of being. That's you becoming more fully alive. And again, the fullness of your life is God's glory. So being grounded in our faith allows us to experience God's love in our being, and then also allows us a freedom in our doing to become what we are capable of becoming without being too attached to the results. Now, how do we go about remaining grounded in our faith? So again, we start with those principles that God is love, that God made us both to be and to do. We start with those principles, but then how do we carry it out in our daily life? So I like James Finley's idea about having a daily rendezvous with God where there is no agenda but love alone. So in this daily encounter with God, we're allowing God to love us, and we're allowing ourselves that opportunity to both receive love and then also express love. Now, again, some of you may already have a regular time of prayer or meditation, but it's something that my clients frequently ask me about. And so I'd like to suggest some ideas about that. Sometimes it's complicated because there can be a lot of uncertainty that goes along with how to pray or how to meditate. There can be guilt, there can be worry about not doing it right or not doing it enough. Sometimes there's concerns about, like, I'm just going through the motions or I'm not really getting anything out of it. And if you find yourself in that place, I just want you to know that that's really normal, right? When you think about the writings of the mystics, they're oftentimes trying to help people with those very same concerns. So I want you to know that there are books that are available about how to do that and how to make that easier for yourself. There's coaching that you can get, there's spiritual direction. You don't have to try to figure that out on your own. And I'm certainly willing to help you if that's something that you need. And also, I'd like you to know that if you allow yourself to become rooted in your faith, that your business is more likely to thrive. Your daily rendezvous with God is like rich soil in which your business is planted. So think about a plant that sinks its roots deeply into that rich soil and draws the nutrients from that soil, right? Think about the fruit that it's able to produce. I have some citrus trees in my backyard, and there have been times that the fruit is very well developed, and there's other times that the fruit isn't as well developed. And I know that it has to do with the nutrition in the soil and what the tree is able to draw. So imagine that your business is grounded in faith and drawing that nutrition. What your business produces is going to be much more abundant. So if you don't have a regular time of prayer or meditation and you want one, you may be wondering what to do. James Finley recommends a process that has 3 components, and I want to go over each one of these 3 with you. So the first is find your teaching and follow it. Then find your practice and practice it. And then find your community and enter into it. So let's start with find your teaching. What do we mean by teaching? I love the idea of Zen master Dogen, who taught that what we're to do is to find that person whose words awaken in your heart the desire for the great way, and then forget all else. Right now, for you, that might be scripture, that might be the Bible, that might be other sacred texts. But a lot of people, because of challenges in their upbringing about religion, have a hard time connecting to the Bible, or having a hard time with things that were taught at church. So for you, it may not be scripture, it might be poetry. It might be the writings of saints or mystics or spiritual masters. Anything that draws your attention to God, anything that moves your heart and opens you up, can be your teaching. And so what you're looking for is the voice that you hear in these that draws you. That's your teaching. So find your teaching and follow it. 2 is find your practice and practice it. What's your practice? Your practice is anything that takes the teaching that you've heard and that allows you to work with it and draw new understanding from it and new connections and new insights, right? And then the practice allows you to present your concerns to God and present your desires, right? Those meditations are going to bring up concerns. You know, in our life, we've got real things that are going on, and your business might be struggling. You might be having a hard time figuring out how to do your marketing, or how to, you know, sequence your content. You might be having a hard time figuring out, you know, how to hire somebody. Those are very real concerns, and that's just your business. You can have concerns in your family. You can have concerns in other relationships. Maybe you've got health concerns going on. Maybe it's something with your finances. Those are all very real concerns. And God, who loves you infinitely, is infinitely concerned about your concerns. And so your practice takes the teaching that you've heard, works with it, develops those insights, and allows you to apply that to the concerns that you have and to the desires that you have, and bring those to God, right? And then also the practice allows us to experience God's response. God understands your concerns and desires, and God is sustaining you right in the midst of your concerns and desires. God's not waiting for you to get it right to love you. God's not waiting for you to do things perfectly to love you. He's loving you right in the midst of your situation right now as it is. And so our practice allows us to experience God's response. Number 3 is to find your community and enter into it. What's your community? Your community is anybody who understands faith at the level that we're talking about it. Now, that might be somebody in your family, that might be somebody at church, that might be a friend that you connect with, right? Thomas Merton once said that people who understand things at this level, you know, are out there, but they can be hard to find. And so sometimes it's just one other person. If you've got an entire group of people, that's great, but you're looking for at least one other person that you can talk with at this level, another person who understands it and who can support you in this journey. So find your teaching and follow it, find your practice and practice it, find your community and enter into it. So I'd like to share some practical considerations about grounding and about your practice. This may seem like a lot, but really it's possible to start very small, even something like 5 minutes a day, right? That's a place to start. I always tell my clients that consistency is more important than duration. I'd rather you do 5 minutes a day, every day, than to do an hour and have that just be once a week, right? Consistency is more important. And then the other thing to recognize is that often a challenge that's going to come up is distraction, right? You intend to have some quiet time, but then, you know, the phone rings, you get an urgent email, or, you know, your kids need something from you. Know that distraction is part of the process, that God isn't waiting for you to be distraction-free, to be working in your life and to help you to feel grounded, to feel secure, so that your business can thrive. Also know that as you apply yourself, it's going to be easier to figure out what to do with the distractions. So again, keep in mind that distractions are not a barrier to God loving you, and He loves you where you are right now in the midst of the distractions. So when I think about being grounded in our faith, you know, this can seem very complicated. And so I'd like to see if I can help to simplify it for you. So you can think about where you are, where you would like to be, and how you're going to get there. So when you think about where you are right now in your faith and in your business, you might have some ideas about that. You might think, you know, my business is not doing as well as I would like, or my business is thriving. You might think, you know, I've really got my faith dialed in, or you might think, you know, I'm sort of sketchy about that, right? There's where you are in terms of where you think you are, but I'm going to suggest even more importantly is, where does God think you are, right? A loving God, a God who is supporting you where you are right now. And so the question is, in terms of where you are, can you join God in God loving you where you are right now. Wherever you are is where you are, and that's okay. And it's okay because God is loving you. So that's where you are right now. And then I want you to think about, where do you want to be? That you have dreams for your business. I'm going to suggest to you that the most fruitful thing that we can do is to decide on goals for your business that are going to help you to become the person that you are capable of being, right? Think about, we can think about it in terms, our business in terms of having an impact on other people. We can think about it in terms of sales. We can think about it in those ways, but we can also think about it in terms of, who do we become in the process of pursuing those goals? So where do you want to be, and how will getting there grow you? And so when I think about where I want to be, and I recognize that my success is irrelevant in terms of God loving me, again, it gives me a freedom to pursue the results, and then to, as I pursue those results, to become the best version of me that I can be. As I clarify the result that I want, being clear about the results has a magnetic quality, right? The clearer I am about the result that I'm trying to accomplish, the more compelling it becomes, and it draws me in that direction. Now, once I achieve that particular result, then the result itself becomes neutral, right? You may have heard stories of people that accomplish something and they accomplish it and say, well, is that all there is? Or you may have heard like about astronauts, the astronauts who walked on the moon, and afterwards some of them, felt a kind of depression. They had worked their whole life in getting to that one thing, and then after that was done, it's like, okay, well, what do you do after you walk on the moon, right? So after we achieve a particular result, it's going to become neutral. So it's important that we're not too attached to the results that we're going after. We want to celebrate the success of it and enjoy that, right? There's going to be a momentary good feeling that goes along with that, but then we want to be able to move on. So the analogy that I think about is, again, think about the citrus trees that I have growing in my yard, right? There's last year's fruit that was that grew and developed, but there's also going to be next year's fruit, right? And so I want to, harvest the fruit from this year, but then I also want to be prepared for the fruit that's still coming. So when we allow ourselves to be rooted in faith, and we recognize that as we're pursuing the results of our business, that it allows us to become what we're capable of becoming, what I realize is that then I am growing in my capacity to receive love from God, to receive love from others. That's my being. And then also to engage in loving other people. And my business becomes a vehicle for doing that. So that the simplicity is, where am I at now? Where am I going? How am I going to get there, right? And I'm going to get there with God's assistance. In some of the other presentations that you'll have access to, how we accomplish results and how we handle problems is through mindset tools. And those mindset tools work because God created the mind. When we operate consistently with that design, that's how we get the best results. So we're able to use the mindset tools to clarify the results that we're going after, to align our thinking with the results, and then to monitor and adjust. So where are we now? Where do we want to be? How do we get there? Those mindset tools and being grounded in our faith is what allows us to get there. So let's say that we are able to be grounded in our faith. What's the result of that? So some things that I'm going to suggest are going to happen when we're grounded in our faith and when we pursue our business in this way, is that you're going to see increased growth. Again, think about the roots that go into rich soil. You're going to see growth from that, right? You're also going to see an increased value in your failures. Now, that might seem kind of strange, but if we recognize that when we make an attempt at something and it doesn't work out, there is valuable data in the failure. And if we can draw that out, that allows us to be more successful next time. So not only is there increased growth in our business, but there's increased fruitfulness in our failures. And then also there's going to be an increased harvest. And what I mean by that is when you think about, the way that God made things, like God made trees, God made the plants that grow, and we are able to benefit from that. We collect it, we benefit from that. That's God's design. God has designed us in such a way that he wants there to be growth, that he wants there to be fruit. He wants us to be able to collect the fruit and to be able to benefit from it. So there's the increased harvest that we're talking about might be in terms of connection with your colleagues, connections with your customers, connection with your community. The increased harvest can also be in vitality, in your individual growth, in empowered emotional states, feeling more alive, being more energetic and being more engaged. And the third harvest is meaningful pursuit. And what I mean by that is that you're able to have a greater impact in the lives of your customers, right? Many of us have gotten into this work because we want to make a real difference in the lives of others. And if you're here and you're listening to me because you want to make a difference in the lives of others, that's part of the harvest that we can expect that comes from being grounded in our faith and allowing our business to operate from that faith. So it can be a greater impact in the lives of your customers, but then also the corollary to that is sustainable income for you. So that's really what we're looking for in being grounded in our faith, is that the fruitfulness, the harvest that comes from that, the connection, the vitality, the meaningful pursuit. It's been a pleasure sharing these ideas with you. And if you'd like to learn more, or if you're interested in working with me, feel free to reach out. I'd love to talk with you to see if working together would be a good fit. Thank you and have a great day.